Okay, it's so great to see so many new people, and it was so interesting because when I put this panel together, sometimes I thought, I don't know, maybe everybody already knows everything there is to know about bridging policy and legislation. But Utah's unique, right? Every state is unique, and we've got a lot of folks that are newer to Utah, and hopefully we can demystify some things today about how what works in Utah, right? And so I want to have each of our, hi, Senator Weiler, glad you can make it.
Sorry, I was late. Sorry, I was late.
No, busy and traffic and the parking, I know, but look at this gorgeous space that we get to just all sit in these comfy chairs and just have a chat in. So I'd love for each of you to introduce yourself. Thank you so much they're not getting paid or anything. I'm not getting paid, so thank you everyone for showing up. But introduce yourself, what you do, and your favorite thing about Utah. Who wants to go first?
Marina. I guess I'll go. Okay. Hi, so nice to see all of you today. My name is Marina Lowe. I'm the policy director at Equality Utah. My favorite thing about Utah, everybody said it, but it's just the geographical place that we live. I love being able to walk out my door and hike with my dogs, which I do almost every day. And it feels like a true privilege to live in a place where there's that sort of accessibility to incredible, beautiful nature. So that's what makes me happy about living here.
I second that. I love the nature, of course, but when Sarah said to lean to your neighbor and say your favorite thing, I turned to Marie and I said bipartisanship, but then we just started laughing. But I couldn't help it. But I love that Senator Weiler matches his socks to his tie. That's what I love.
Well, it's not exactly the same orange, but it's the best I could pull off this
close.
morning. So thank you. I am really sorry I'm late. I actually am a lawyer, and I go to court a lot. I got pulled into an emergency temporary restraining order motion this afternoon, and I wasn't watching my watch close enough, but I'm here now, so thank you. I actually grew up in Illinois, and I've lived for a couple of years in the Phoenix area of Arizona and in the Los Angeles area of California. I've chosen to live in Utah because I just love it here. I love everything about Utah. I remember I grew up in the distant suburbs of Chicago, and I was a little bit of a snob when I came out to go to BYU. And I remember the first time I turned on Channel 5, it was the first time I turned on the 10 o'clock news in Utah, I literally laughed out loud because it just, to me, looked like a high school production or something. I don't think that's true today. I think that Salt Lake and Utah have grown up a lot. When I came to Utah in 1985, the Jazz were still relatively new. I didn't know who Karl Malone was. But I just absolutely love Utah. I've got 4 kids who are all adults and married now, and I've raised my family here in Utah. My wife, I married a girl from a dairy farm in Spanish Fork, but we absolutely love Utah, just every aspect of it. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good.
Thank you. And ironically, I might be the most Utah on stage. I'm a lifelong, I was adopted since I was 3 years old. So yeah, I mean, Utah's my home, right? We love it and we want to see it thrive. And I think one of my favorite things about Utah, I just want to say something different than what has already been said, is our ability to get things done is pretty remarkable. We're small enough to still get things done, and I actually really, really appreciate that. So today's panel is to focus on building bridges between policy and business. And I want to keep this really business focused. I know we have a lot of issues we all care about, but I specifically want to demystify from a business perspective, if all of you are part of organizations, how can we build bridges with our legislators? Just for a long time, I've been in business for a very long time, and I've kind of seen that sometimes business feels like they're kind of the separate thing. And when it comes to important issues where businesses should get involved, we sometimes don't know how. So today we really want to focus on the how more than the what. I mean, we can touch on issues, but it's really, I've got some experts here that literally spend a lot of time with the legislature, and to help us understand specifically from a business perspective, what works, what doesn't work. So the election's on everybody's mind. I'm not going to start there, but it was incredibly divisive. Let's actually start from an angle that's a little bit more, from your experience, when you see all of the policies that are trying to be, rolled out and the things that everybody wants, what would you say are the common themes that are common ground for everyone? have you noticed some themes that just, no matter how divisive the topic is, have you seen that there is common ground on those things?
I think everyone wants a better future for their children and their grandchildren. I know I certainly do. Now, what exactly that future looks like, we may disagree on, but I think I think one starting point is we want a better Utah for the next generation.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think that encompasses a lot of specific issues, like we want our kids and grandkids to be able to have affordable housing, comfortable housing. We want them to be able to have jobs and opportunities to better their future. We want them to have an environment that includes clean air, and so that they can enjoy the same wonders of Utah that we enjoy today. So absolutely
We want
agree.
them not to live in our house forever.
Well,
So we
that
want
is
them
of course true. Out of the basement.
affordable housing.
And healthcare affordability. I think that's top of mind. I hear that a lot lately, talking about how healthcare costs are rising and how do we get affordable healthcare. I think that's one common ground issue for sure.
When it comes to business, now all of these are relevant, right? Because we're hiring folks. We want them to see Utah as a place where whoever it is that they're bringing to Utah can thrive. When it comes to business specifically, are there some common ground issues that you have noticed really resonate with most everybody?
Go ahead, Todd.
Well, I think everyone, regardless of your flavor of politics, they want businesses to prosper. They want high-paying jobs. They want benefits and all of that, all of those things. I think Utah, the legislature and the governor were always telling people we're a business-friendly state, and I think that that's true. Again, that means different things to different people, but what it means to me is we're not throwing up a bunch of artificial regulation and hoops making businesses jump through it and costing them more money. Now, we do that where the health and safety of people is concerned, but we don't create a lot of artificial barriers that sometimes you see in other states.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that a little bit. The business-friendly state, we hear it all the time. Utah's a business-friendly state, and there's a ton of reasons why that is. Lower taxes, and historically we had really relatively cheap utilities. That's changing. We are seeing that shift a little bit, but it's interesting though, because I think there's this vision to make Utah an innovation and entrepreneur state. So they're trying to remove barriers and create resources. And so I see that a lot as well.
I just on the utilities, I live in Woods Cross, which is about 12 minutes north of here. And our sewer rates in southern Davis County, or in Davis County, they've more than doubled in the last 5 years. And I've had some constituents reaching out to me and they want me to do something about it. Well, first of all, that's not a state legislative issue. But second of all, I say, okay, yeah, they've doubled. Do you realize we're still less than half the national average? And so be careful what you hope for, because even though they doubled on our sewer rates, that's it's a small amount per month. We're still doing pretty well.
Yeah, and what would you say is your argument for businesses getting more involved in policy? Is there an argument you have? Are they too involved? I mean, what's your thought? Oh, interesting.
I don't think so. It's interesting because most businesses would like to get involved, but they don't know how. You mentioned that. You referenced that early on. And so, I'm with the Salt Lake Chamber. I don't think I referenced that when I started, when we did our intros, but I'm with the Salt Lake Chamber, and we really work to have a conduit between businesses and the legislature. And this is the first time Marina and I were actually just chatting about this. Most businesses want to come up, and on the Hill, the process is a little bit nebulous. They don't know how the process works. It seems a little bit daunting and scary. But if you can break it down for them, that bill will be heard in committee, and we kind of walk them through the process. But this last year, for the first time, and I've been doing this for a long time, was the first time I had businesses say, I don't know if I want to go on the Hill. I'm a little bit nervous. And so I think I'm seeing a shift. I would love to hear you guys see if you think you're seeing the shift too.
Yeah, I agree. And to answer your first question, should businesses be more involved? I think absolutely. Despite the fact, Senator Weiler, I do agree that Utah is a business-friendly state with maybe fewer regulations than other states. Nevertheless, the legislature and the policies that are passed by the legislature often do impact business. We see this all the time. And so if you're not being involved and raising concerns about how policy might impact your bottom line or your ability to really prosper as a business, then that's going to go unheard. So I think you have to raise your voice and show up at the legislature. And obviously it can feel daunting and intimidating, but hopefully that's what we can talk about today and in the months that come about how to break down that process. Because legislators do need to hear from business about how the actions they take actually are going to impact their lives and their success.
And I just want to add, Natalie introduced herself. Raise your hand, Natalie, if you don't mind. So what she does, she's a really great tool for all businesses. And she does something that I have no desire to do, but she does it well. She reads all the bills and then goes through the chamber's database to see who that bill will impact and reaches out to them directly to see how it, hey, this bill might impact you. And there were a couple of bills that she reached out to some trucking companies, and then we met with the legislators, and the trucking companies came forward, and the legislator said, maybe this is not ready for prime time. And that was all Natalie. So, I mean, she's proactively reaching into the database and pulling people in, and it's pretty amazing.
So I think whenever you do something for the first time, it's harder because it's foreign and it's scary. Whether it's going to a church for the first time, going to a caucus for the first time, trying to find this room for the first time, it's unfamiliar. And I think one of the greatest experiences I had that I brought into my current position in the legislature is there were several times before I was in office where I came up and tried to find parking at the Capitol. This was like in the late 90s, early 2000s. I tried to find a committee room. I went and testified against a bill. And it's very intimidating because the first time I testified against a bill, I had to come up, and the sponsor of the bill, who happened to be Becky Lockhart, she later became Speaker of the House, the only female speaker, she's sitting right next to me, and I'm testifying against her bill. And I'm like, this is kind of scary. And I did that 2 or 3 times, and I've never forgotten how intimidating that was. And so when I'm the committee chair, I try to make people feel welcome. I try to give them a chance to talk. And I'm like, I realize how much effort it's been. And let me tell you, since COVID, it's so much easier because now you can just log on from your home computer or your work computer if you want to, and you can not only watch the hearing, but you can raise your hand and have a chance at testifying for or against a bill. So having had that experience myself was very, very helpful. And I'm a little bit I'm not easily, well, I'm not afraid of being embarrassed because I do it all the time, like being late for this forum. But I first met Ginger because we were both part of the Davis Chamber of Commerce's, and they have a legislative affairs committee, and we get together and discuss bills. And I don't know if you were there that early, but we, like 50 of us went up, and we were trying to get Legacy Highway built, and we were wearing these orange stickers that said "Build Legacy Now." And there's great memories. I made so many good friends. People I'm still acquainted with. So getting involved with a chamber or another organization where it's not just you and you have other people that may know different things than you, have different life experience, or heaven forbid, maybe even smarter than you, like reading a bill and can explain to you what it means if you don't understand that particular bill, because I struggle with that after 13 sessions. So I think all of those, but once you've done it once, it's easier the second, third, and for Marina, like the 10,000th time. So.
When I started spending time just doing different projects up on the Hill, I actually was really struck, and I don't know why I thought this, I was struck at how respectful and kind both parties were to each other. And I don't like, right, we see this on sort of the outside, this acrimonious sort of, tension-filled atmosphere, like just we get the sense that they're butting heads all of the time. And I just went up and like, they're really nice to each other. And it was actually like, right, for me to see that in person, not to, and that's just a little small thing, but like the legislative process is actually quite respectful, right? And I just was really, I think being able to see that helps kind of relieve whatever are some of those concerns. But yes, it can be daunting. And on the virtual one, I noticed they give more time to the virtual people. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just join on virtually. I'll get an extra minute to talk. And one person did it while walking on a treadmill. I mean, you just get all sorts of new things now, right? That you didn't.
It's true. We did enact a new rule about 2 years ago now. We make you turn on your camera. We want to see you because if you came in person, could see you. And we make you tell us whether you live in Utah. We'll let you testify if you live in California, but we want to know that.
That gets ugly.
Well, yeah, but because it's virtual, you could log on from Saudi Arabia and testify. So we want to know where you live. We're not asking you your address. We're asking you, do you live in the state? What county do you live in? That's usually as far as we go.
And the screen on issue became a little challenging during COVID, as I recall. You never know quite what people would be wearing at home.
Well, we did that after. We made it mandatory after COVID. And let me just say, 90% of all of the votes on the Utah House floor and the Utah Senate floor, 90% plus, are unanimous or nearly unanimous. What do I mean by nearly unanimous? Is there's always a jerk in each body. It's usually a Republican who votes no on everything. And so we don't count that. We just tend to ignore that person after a while. But what I'm trying to tell you is if you only read the Salt Lake Tribune, you would think that we're at each other's throats. And there are clearly some social issues that divide us. But for the most part, we like each other. We're friendly to each other. Karen Maine was a very prominent Democrat who was beloved in the Senate. She happened to be a Democrat. I went to her funeral last summer, and I counted at least 12 Republican lawmakers or former lawmakers that were at her funeral on a beautiful Saturday when they could have been doing other things. And that's the type of camaraderie we have up there. And when we're attacked, like verbally attacked or on Twitter or whatever, or social media, usually we're attacked as a legislature. And so we kind of learn to hunker down. Like even though we might be voting against each other's bills from time to time, we're still kind of part of a team. And the most frustrating thing about the legislature is I don't get to choose my colleagues. If I did, I'd probably make some different selections, but I have to work with, and a lot of you that if you're working in a business, you don't always get to choose your colleagues either. So you just kind of have to play the cards that have been dealt to you.
All right, who wants to take the task to give the quick TLDR on the legislative process? Just the quick. So if I said, hey, okay, I'm going to pick on Ginger.
I could tell you were going to do that.
Okay, I know. I was like, who am I going to pick on? Okay, so okay, now she just described Natalie reaches out to a company. Hey, there's this bill that you might want to get involved in. I'm the company. I'm just trying to run my business. I'm like, yeah, this kind of sounds like really important. Ginger, what do I do?
Well, it certainly depends on the issue for sure, but we're pretty standardized in our response on that. As Todd referenced, we don't ever put you out there by yourself. We always we have at the chamber committees that have some like visions. They have some like needs. They're together. So we generally will. And I'm just talking about from the chamber's perspective. I mean, if you were an independent, that'd be totally different. But we would educate you on the issue, bring you up on the Hill, tell you what time the bill would be heard in committee. And generally, 99% of the time before the bill's heard in committee, I'm knocking on legislators' door with you to talk to legislators who are on the committee or the bill sponsor or the House or the floor sponsor to talk about why it's a problem or why we like it or why we feel like certain areas of the bill need to be amended. So we'll go up there with you to meet with a legislator one-on-one. And really that's where the magic is, to really have the behind the scenes conversations before it gets to committee. Most of the time, and Todd, I'm sure you can attest to this, it's already decided before it goes to committee anyway. That if you're going up there in opposition to a bill, it's probably already pretty well baked.
I would say some of the time it isn't, at least. So it's
yeah,
like
give
Dumb
us
and
a
Dumber.
percentage. Yeah, I would
So you're
love to
telling
hear.
me there's a chance.
Yeah.
I'd say probably most of the time is fair, but not always. And sometimes people will switch their vote when they hear the testimony.
And sometimes small amendments often can happen based on testimony
Absolutely.
from people, pointing out something that nobody had noticed. And it's like, yeah, that is a legitimate concern. We'll fix it.
So there's the kind of the round of talking with the sponsors, the legislators, and saying, hey, explain this to me, help me understand, let me tell you how it's going to impact my business or my employees or whoever is my stakeholder. And I have been in some of those meetings with Ginger. It's wonderful to have someone there that knows what they're doing. And then and then when it does get to committee, so there's committee on the Senate, committee on the House side, right? When it gets to committee, there's a couple of things that I've observed are really challenging for businesses, which are typically they will announce the agenda only one day before, right? Is it a 24-hour?
It's not less than 24 hours. So if it's a
Okay.
Monday committee, you'll often see that posted on Friday
Friday.
because our staff doesn't like to have to work over the weekend. And that's not to be tricky. It's because we have a 45-day session, which is a lie because that includes the weekends when we don't hold meetings. So it's really a 33-day session. And the only way we can do it is as soon as a bill is published or made public when it's drafted, it's read into the House, then it goes to Rules Committee. If we had like a 48 or a 72-hour waiting period, we couldn't do what we do. We just need a longer session.
So it keeps the bills moving forward. But for business folks, it's hard for them to react. If I wanted
Absolutely.
to do a hearing or testimony, right? So the virtual option is really, really nice. In fact, I had somebody do it from a plane. I probably violated some, when they were like, no cell, I don't know.
I was on a plane a few months ago, and the guy next to me was on Zoom calls like the whole time. I'm like,
Really?
how did you do that? So I don't know. He was like a computer guy, but he told me how he did it, but I didn't understand it.
Okay, all right, so, but virtual is an option. Is there a benefit to doing in person or virtual? Is there a benefit to doing in person?
I think anything is, like, if we were all on Zoom right now, you could hear what we'd say, but it wouldn't be the same experience. So I think in person's always better, but that's not always an option. And the thing I love about virtual is people in Logan and St. George and Los Angeles and San Francisco. I mean, they all have a chance. And if you're traveling, and I'll tell you, since we started doing virtual, I have been voting on the Senate floor. I voted on the Senate floor from Paris and from London myself, just because these special sessions kind of pop up when I don't travel to Europe that often. I wish I did, but it's cool for us too, because I don't have to be there. Now, if I did that every time, I'd get some pushback, but occasionally is okay.
Interesting. Okay, so considering some of the bills are already sort of, they kind of know where, how they want to vote. What is the value of doing in-person hearings? So there's value in having the meetings one-on-one with the legislators. What's the value of like a business leader testifying at the hearing? And sometimes it's only like 1 or 2 minutes. Sometimes only 1 minute.
Usually only 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's quick. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's value in going on the record, especially if it's something that's significant and likely to, in an important way affect your business. I think Ginger is absolutely right. Oftentimes things are sort of worked out and negotiated before you actually end up in committee. Not always, but oftentimes. But I think committee hearings serve another purpose as well. They go into the official record. They are part of the history of the bill that accompanies that bill forever. And, it's important as a vehicle for informing the public also who can follow along either by listening into the hearing themselves, or often the news media in one form or another is covering especially very critical and important issues. And so when a hearing is happening at the Capitol, the individuals who are speaking for and against the bill or suggesting changes are all part of that conversation that gets reported back to the public. So I think hearings do serve an additional purpose beyond just debating and figuring out, what are the changes to the piece of legislation that's being heard. They also are to inform the public and to have it be vetted in a way that everybody can understand.
I'm going to tell you a great secret that it took me a while to figure out, and I figured it out when someone did it to me, but often we go from committee to committee, especially in the first half of the session, and I would have someone come up to me in my Social Services Appropriations Committee right at the end before I got up, and they'd say, hey, could I walk with you to your next committee? And oftentimes that would be a 5 or 10 minute walk because I'm going all the way across the Capitol campus. And so if you're going to testify in front of a committee and there's someone on the committee you've been trying to get to, that's a great secret. Or you can be sitting in there in the committee, because usually there's 5 or 6 or 8 bills, and you might go to the website, the le.utah.gov, and stupid people like me, we actually put our real cell phone number on the website. So you could be you could be texting me and saying, Senator Weiler, I'm in the red dress on the third row. I'm going to be testifying in a few minutes. This is what I want you to know. And I hope that you'll give my testimony some serious consideration. I am ADHD enough that I will be looking at my phone during the committee and I will see your text. And most legislators are just like me. So
I'll have to say though too, if I ever am going up to do a, in front of the committee and talk in front of a committee so that I'm on the record, I make sure beforehand. So let's say if I'm going in and I'm going to oppose Senator Weiler's bill.
what?
Never. I would never do that to you. But that's hypothetically. We're living in the world of hypotheticals. I will text and say, or call, or have a meeting beforehand and say, I'm going to go in opposition and I'm going to say the following. I don't ever want to blindside anybody. And even if I'm going in to advance a bill and I'm a champion of their bill, I will tell them ahead of time, I'm going to be in there and I'm going to say the following. And I've had other legislators reach out to me and say, thanks for coming in to, testify for my bill, but can you add this if you want to really make some impact? And so I try to work with them so that I'm not blindsiding them.
Absolutely. That's 100% rule. I would never show up and oppose somebody's bill without letting them know I was going to.
But also she's like a lobbyist. And so her relationships, I've been working with Marina for 12, 13 years now. And so she doesn't want to blow a relationship, ruin a relationship over one issue. So, but, if you're not a lobbyist, you can blow
But still, I think
relationship.
it's good.
I think it's the right thing to do, but some of you may not know who to talk to or how to contact them. That's why we're trying to break down some of those barriers.
Good point.
And I had a legislator, I introduced him to my husband, and I thought it was probably the nicest, meanest thing they've ever said, but they said, we are never on the same side of issues, but she always comes at me with respect and tells me ahead of time what she's going to do. And I thought, that's good. I think that's a nice thing to say.
Yeah. And I did a few walks with Senator Weiler last year. You're everywhere. Like these legislators are everywhere. It's a really busy time, and so these tips and tricks are really, really helpful. One thing I have noticed is sometimes in committee, there's been times when they only let a few people testify, and like there's some, I don't know, is it some sign up sheet or something that we missed? But like the room's packed and they'll be like, we're only gonna have like 2 testimonies, and I'm like, oh, but like there's a lot of people here. So
so let me give you the skinny on that. So first of all, if you're testifying before a budget committee, we call them appropriations committees, which is a big word for budget. There is usually, like on my social services, there is a rule that you're supposed to sign up online 24 hours in advance. We don't always enforce that rule, but sometimes we do. But I think you're talking more about the standing committees where bills are being heard. So I think it's harder at the end of the session because things are it's like the frog in the pot in the water. The frog doesn't jump out if you put it in when it's lukewarm and then boil it. We're all boiling by the end of the session because it just gets a little bit hotter each week and each day. And so, but also we have hard stops in committee, and not everybody understands this, but we generally have floor time at like 11 a.m. and at 2 p.m. And so if you are testifying in a committee and your bill comes up and it's 10:50 or 10:45, because we usually break at 10:50, they have to get on the floor. And by the way, if we take any action in a committee after the gavel has come down, it's automatically void and invalidated. So you will hear chairs say, I'm sorry, we have a hard stop. And maybe what happened was you were 5th on the agenda and the committee chair let the first item on the agenda go for an hour and a half, and now they're trying to rush through the other 4 bills. Now, if it's a really big bill and like the room is packed, they're probably not going to rush it. But we also have social issue bills. They may have 200 people show up and they all want to testify, and the hearing started at 4 p.m. And I've seen those, and I've chaired those meetings where they've gone to 8 or 9 p.m. But we have bailiffs and security and staff. They're not legislators, but they're taking notes and minutes and stuff like that. They have to go home. I mean, they sometimes there's a blizzard outside, and so I don't know of any legislator who wakes up in the morning and thinks, I'm going to cut off public comment today. But sometimes it's just necessary because of our schedules.
And so with that in mind, what I would say is if you are planning to go up and testify, it's really helpful to sort of boil down your testimony into the most cogent, important pieces that you want to communicate.
And don't repeat what the person in front of you just said.
Exactly. Have bullet points so you can go through and, follow scales, talk fast. I don't know. I once got asked to give an sort of overview of bail litigation in the United States in 90 seconds. So that was certainly a challenge, and I obviously didn't succeed very well at that, but we try.
So us fast talkers have a head start there. But I would agree that be like very focused. I think the one challenge I've had from a business perspective is if I've worked with a business leader to get them up on the hill, to take away from their precious business time, and then it's cut off, like that leaves that, well, not only me feeling frustrated, but that person feeling like they just wasted their time. What would you recommend that, is there something that can be done in that case where they, I don't know, like Ginger, because it's hard sometimes to get folks, and they have to kind of move mountains, right, to get their schedules to work.
So, I mean, obviously a committee vote has probably already happened at that point when it's over, but following the process of the legislation, we'll start making appointments with legislators immediately for the next committee, in advance of the next committee hearing or the floor time. So we know that it's going to go to the floor, so we'll start
Ginger,
reaching
you
out.
need to pause and explain floor time. We're using jargon.
Oh, sorry. So every bill will go to the floor for it to be voted on. So Todd's in the Senate, so it'll go to the Senate floor for the Senate to vote on it. And likewise, it has time on the House floor where it's voted on by House members. And so we know that a bill has to pass both parties.
Both bodies.
Both bodies, sorry, and parties sometimes, both bodies. And so we'll go and meet with the legislators, sometimes pull them off the floor and start to work that angle. So it's not necessarily once it's heard in the committee, it's done. We have to follow the process and work through the process. So you just have to keep trying.
The other thing you can do sometimes, I've done this when I have like a really important speaker that I want to get time. I will text the chair of the committee and say, look, I've got so-and-so, he's a really important whatever, he has something very critical to say. Can you make sure that he gets at least a minute or two to speak during public comment? So,
And there's nobody that's going to turn Marina down.
well, there might be somebody.
But I would say if it's a CEO or someone of that stature, so I think you can lay the groundwork. Maybe you bring them up the day before the hearing and get legislators, pull them off the floor, pull them out in between hearings, or even during a hearing. Someone will step out, especially the appropriations hearings, because they're really dry and boring a lot of times. And then maybe have him log in the next day because now he's met some of the key people. I think Marina's suggestion is also excellent. Now, if it's an 8 a.m. hearing, you're not going to be able to do a lot before the hearing, but you could do it the day before. If it's a 4 o'clock hearing, or which I have 2 of those tomorrow at the same time, which is also not unusual for legislators. I would bring them up at lunchtime and try to, or maybe at 2 o'clock, and not just bring them. I bring them up before the hearing, or even walk up as you're waiting for a quorum. You don't want to walk behind the legislators, but walk straight up and say, hey, can I introduce you to so-and-so? He's the CEO of this company, and he's hoping to testify today. Usually we're very accommodating and respectful in person.
I could say that most legislators, almost every one of them actually, will make time. And they're so busy, and I so appreciate them and their willingness to make time because we know how busy you are.
So speaking of time, the floor time is kind of fascinating because you're on the floor voting, but constituents can request for you to step out and talk to them.
We did away with the notes, the paper notes.
Those are
So
not.
now you're supposed to text us or our interns.
Okay.
You can still do it, it's just electronic.
Okay, so what is the value of interrupting your voting time to have you come and speak with constituents or lobbyists or whoever?
I do most of my meetings during floor time, and there are parts of floor time like endless recognitions and all kinds of stuff. But both the House and the Senate, we have a lounge behind the floor that you can't see, you can't publicly access. And so I'll usually have my intern bring Marina or Ginger back to the lounge, and as soon as I think I have 2 or 3 minutes, then I'll go back there and meet with them. So sometimes they have to wait for me a little bit, sorry. And then if a vote comes up while we're talking, I can excuse myself, step on the floor, vote, and then come right back and finish the meeting. And I've had meetings where I've voted 5 or 6 times, especially at the end of the session because we're voting quicker, like the last 3 days of the session.
Do you feel like you get to know the issues when you're doing that? I mean, you're pretty well versed on the issues, but I know it's hard, isn't it?
The best thing you can ever do with a legislator is give them a 1-page summary. If someone comes up with a 50-page report, I'm not going to read it, and you probably wouldn't either if I gave it to you. If you can do a 1-page summary and say, here's the most important things, I love 1-page summaries. And so if you can meet with me, and give me that. Then I can take it back to my desk and I can review it. I can take it to committee with me. I can ask questions from that. So I think you can also send me an email, but I get hundreds and hundreds of emails during the session. So I always tell people, if you're going to email me, that's great. Text me and say, I just emailed you this at 3:23 p.m. so that I can easily find it. Not that I never read your emails, but I might read it at 2 o'clock in the morning the next day. So
How many emails do you get during the legislative session?
300 or more a day. And that's in addition to my law firm practice.
Oh, okay.
So.
I learned a tip, and I don't know if I'm supposed to be sharing this, but the intern lists are available, so you can go take a screenshot. That's just what I did, is took a screenshot. So the intern phone numbers, and the phone numbers, like your intern, even though you have a new intern every year, the phone number is the same.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So they're actually really easy to reach and schedule. And so that's been a really nice thing for me to
So like
discover.
Mike Kennedy's leaving and he'll be replaced by Brady Brammer. So if you had Mike Kennedy's intern's phone number from last session, it'll probably be Brady Brammer's intern because he's taking that slot, you know. So it's even more nuanced than that.
Okay. It's just we're getting all the behind the scenes, everyone.
Oh, and
Alright,
Sarah, talk about interns a little bit, or we can talk about interns.
College students, they're usually political science majors. All of the universities feed them to us. They're paid a pittance. I had an intern tell me a few years ago, it was a Friday of the first week of the session, and I took him to lunch, and he said, "I feel like I've learned more this week than my last semester," and which totally made sense to me.
Oh yeah.
And they're the best tool, honestly. When we reach out to interns, they are so great to get meetings. Most of the time, we have relationships with legislators, but I know how busy they are, so I'll just go through the interns so I can get on their calendar, and they're wonderful. They really help a lot. I'm sure that you could.
We couldn't do what we do without
Yeah.
our interns, and they're different every year. Like I've had 13 interns, but I've never had one repeat because they move on with their lives. So I've had a few come back as lobbyists, though.
Okay. Good work, Marcus. Okay, let's get to something a little bit more challenging. So, most bills are agreed upon by both parties, but then you get some of these topics that tend to be more divisive. So, politics, I think, is not an area you go into unless you can manage conflict. And so, what are the things that you have, like when you know you're working with someone who fundamentally has a difference of opinion, right? Which I would expect happens a lot. What are some things that you have seen work really well? I think we know what doesn't work, but what does work well?
Before you answer, let me just say the divisions are not always Democrat Republican. Sometimes it's rural versus urban. Sometimes it's House versus Senate. Sometimes it's governor's office versus the legislature. Sometimes it's counties versus cities. It's amazing. You might think everything's Republican versus Democrat. That is not true. But with that, go ahead.
No, I want Marina to answer this because I get to watch her sometimes, and you tackle hard issues where there's a lot of challenges, but you do it with such grace. It's fun to watch.
Well, this is my bread and butter, I think, working in the very conservative Utah legislature. I work for Equality Utah now, but I worked for the ACLU of Utah for 15 years before that. And so it often felt like you all had my playbook in terms of bill ideas. You're just going through the list and picking issues that were going to be really, really challenging for me. And you know, there are so many things that I have learned over the years about how to make progress on challenging issues. And, you know, first and foremost, I think it's just understanding that the person that you're working with across from you is a person. So treating them with respect and dignity and listening to their perspective and point of view and the reasons that they're running legislation and why, and hoping for that same ability to listen and hear when being returned to me. And I will say, I have come to feel like when a bill is introduced that is sort of contrary to my organization's position, I look at it as a challenge, but as a challenge to create a new relationship with that legislator. And 9 times out of 10, it really does work. I have created a relationship with that person through the process of working through the challenge of the bill. And I have so many examples, but I'll give you one. And a couple of years ago, Representative Mike Peterson and Representative Brady Brammer wanted to introduce a piece of legislation which would have legalized conversion therapy, at least talk conversion therapy, And so
And those are two of the most conservative members of the House.
Absolutely. And so I just knew that I had a real challenge in front of me as Equality Utah, the state's LGBTQ organization. We were, of course, going to be opposed to that. And so we went in at these really opposing positions. There seemed like there was no room at all to give at all. So we had a series of meetings, and what I decided to do in sort of the first meeting was just to listen to Mike Peterson and hear out what his concerns were and to take notes. And I don't even think I offered any suggestions in that meeting. I just wanted to make sure he knew I was listening and I was serious about listening. And then I went back and I took a look at our statute and I came up with like a few suggestions of things that I could offer up that were going to be hard for me to offer up, but nonetheless showed good faith that I wanted to negotiate. And he responded back so positively and said, you know, I was really surprised that you were willing to give so much, and it made me want to give something back to you. And so we went on to sort of negotiate over the course of the session, and we ended up with a piece of legislation passed unanimously, one of these unanimous bills, by the deep red Utah legislature banning conversion therapy. And it had some concessions for things that were needed on the other side, but it went from a bill that legalized conversion therapy to actually banning it.
See what I mean? I mean, it's really fun to watch. Yeah, I love what you do. From the chamber's perspective, you know, we kind of boil the ocean. We take on it all kinds of issues, almost too many. But I've had members call and say, I am so mad at this legislator, and I called them up and I gave them a piece of my mind, and now I want the chamber to come up there with me and work on this bill. I won't do it. If you can't come with a respectful tone, I can't work with you to help with our legislature. We're in the business of building relationships as well.
I can't tell you, and I kind of chuckle at them, but I can't tell you how many times I've looked at an email and it says, like, I know you're corrupt and you're paid off and you're only going to vote for bills that pad your pocket or make your rich friends richer, but I'm writing to ask you to do this. And I can't, I mean, it's like, how dumb can you be? But when I get those emails, and they're like, I know you won't respond to this, you probably won't read to it. If you write that to me, 100% chance I'm going to respond to it. But in any event, you do draw more flies with honey. Not that flies are a good thing, but you know, and here the legislators are flies. But I don't know how that helps you at all. And you know, and if I've also had people spout off, like a lot more people are texting me now than 10 years ago. And I'll have people, and text, I think, a little bit more unfiltered sometimes than email. But I've also had people come at me very rudely and disrespectfully, and I've responded to them in a polite or respectful way. And then, like, the next day, they'll text me back and be like, I'm really sorry I sent that to you. And that means a lot, too, because, I mean, I'm a human being. I'm usually going to give someone a second and sometimes a third chance. So.
Senator Weiler, do you have an example? So Marina just shared an example of where she was able to kind of, you know, meet from opposing sides and kind of work through it. Do you have an example that you want to share?
My best example, because look at, legislators are perpetually stabbing each other in the backs, right? Like, I'm on Rules Committee. I might vote not to put your bill on agenda. I'm on Business Labor. I might vote to kill your bill in committee. And yet, the very next day, I might be strategic partners with you to get something passed. And we kind of have to learn, if you can't work with those ebb and flows, you're not going to last up there because you will drive yourself insane. And I think constituencies are the same way, because when Marina was at the ACLU, sometimes I was on her side and sometimes she was opposed to me. But I knew that our relationship was more important than any one bill. At least to her it was. I'm just kidding. But in any event, I think you are dealing with humans and it's transactional at a certain level. This is like my magic elixir. When legislators oppose my bills or they see things differently, I try to remind myself they are doing their very best to represent their constituents the best way they know how. And their constituents are different than my constituents. And I'm doing the very best to do my job to represent my constituents. And that means we might not always land in the same place. By just reminding myself of that a few thousand times, it really does help. And I think one thing I'm very good at, I'm bad at a lot of things, but one thing I'm very good at is not holding grudges against other legislators for not supporting my bills.
do you think a legal background helps? So you and I are
Yes.
attorneys.
Yeah,
and
because
you
we go
both
to court.
through that.
And I know Ginger has something to say, so I don't want
Yeah.
to lose that either. But yeah, I do think it helps that I'm a lawyer and I go into battle a lot in the courtroom and you walk out and yeah.
I mean, I think there's plenty of stories. What's interesting with chamber work is half of our members think that we're too liberal and they want us to be more conservative. And the other half of our members think that we're too conservative and they want us to be more liberal. And so it's really hard to balance that and thread the needle. And so like legislators, I'm not going to say but I'm like a legislator, but we get pulled in so many directions that oftentimes we just have to, pick policy priorities that are really aligned with businesses and not really get into the weeds of the social issues because it'll weigh us down. Yeah, I mean, that's not an example, but it's kind of a broad brush stroke.
And I represent 122,000 people, and I have some of my constituents tell me that I'm too conservative, and I have other constituents tell me I'm too liberal. So I get that, And I have about 5% of my constituents who voted for Phil Lyman, and no matter what I do, it's not going to be good enough for them.
So in business, we often talk about the business case a lot, right? Like make the business case. So when it comes to these policy issues, are there other strategies that we're missing that we haven't, that you've seen work well that aren't just pure like let me make the business case, let me what else works?
I don't know if this is applicable necessarily in a business capacity, but what I have seen work well up at the Capitol often is the power of a personal story. So, and I don't see those as diametrically opposed. I imagine that you could still make the business case by telling a personal story, but that is, the power of a story in general, I think can captivate us and tug on our heartstrings and cause us to think and to pause and to imagine how a certain set of facts can apply to somebody's life and how it might apply more broadly. And so I just think that the power of a personal story is always a great way to illustrate your particular perspective.
I'll give you an example of that if I could. Almost every day during the session, at least the first 4 or 5 weeks of session, we have different industries and trade groups come up and sponsor a lunch for us, which is nice because we get a free meal. But more important, I could afford to buy my own lunch, but more importantly, you get a chance to talk to people, and whether it's cosmetologists or dentists or whatever. But I was at a trade lunch probably 11 years ago, and I sat at this table. We were actually at the Little America, and this business owner from North Salt Lake, which is my district, was telling me he owned this industrial manufacturing little unit down on Redwood Road. And he said that at the end of his manufacturing process, he has to spray paint the stuff. And he said, due to federal regulations, the Clean Air Act, the EPA, they've had to they originally captured like 80% of the aerosol, and then it had to be 85, and then 90%, and then 95. And he told me that they were up to 97%. He said, if the government makes me capture even 1% more, I'm out of business and I have to lay off my employees and go out of business. He said, I've been pushed right up to that threshold. If you make me go, it'll cost me millions of dollars. And that was really helpful. And I've thought about that all the time because I'm co-chair of the Clean Air Caucus and I want to breathe clean air. I ride my bike a lot. But I also don't necessarily want to put people out of business. And the problem with clean air is you have advocates who would say, well, put them out of business. Okay. That attitude's not going to win the day at the Utah legislature. But I'm of the attitude, well, let's push them right up to that line, but let's not cross over it.
Great example. As you think about, and I feel like we're kind of up on time, so I want to make sure that you can share whatever knowledge you are seeing of what we can be prepared for in this upcoming legislation. Like what type of bills do you expect? I know a lot of folks in the room really care about diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, what are the things that you think are going to be the hot topics this next session?
Well, I'm definitely excited to hear about what Senator Weiler thinks. I'll be taking notes, but I will say one of the things, and Ginger and I spoke about this ahead of time. I'm very worried about immigration, what we might see in that area this session. Ginger and I and Senator Weiler have been doing this long enough to remember when there was sort of a wave of anti-immigration legislation that happened 10, 11 years ago now. And the business community did speak up because there was, of course, real impact for the business community on passing some of these pieces of legislation. And Utah, I think, has been a really interesting state when it comes to immigration. We've been a welcoming state. We have a refugee resettlement community here. We, have passed some really progressive and interesting legislation around in-state tuition and driving privilege cards, which of course benefit not just the holders of those types of documents, but all of us. And so I would be very, very sad to see some of those efforts rolled back. But I have real fears that is where the legislature will spend some time this year.
I've been told that there are approximately 30 anti-immigration bills that are just floating around right now. And I've been speaking with members of the leadership asking about those bills. And they are telling me they're trying to consolidate those to bring them to a better place, because a lot of people throw out, ideas, and they're reacting to some of their constituents' requests. So they're throwing out these ideas. So they're trying to wrangle those to make them better. But I was warned that the business community probably won't like some of the bills, but they're trying to make them better. And so I have faith that we're not going to roll everything back, but I think that it's going to be, the business community is going to have to come and work on some of those bills this year, because the immigration community is important to the workforce, and it's necessary and needed right now.
So I get asked this question every fall, and I'm really bad at answering it because I'll give you some of my opinions. But like 1 year ago today, if you'd have asked me like, oh, is there going to be a bill to revitalize downtown Salt Lake for a hockey team, I'd be like, what are you talking about? Yeah, there was that bill. So there's 104 legislators. None of us have to, we don't generally talk to each other in between our monthly interim sessions. It's like we don't all hang out on a Zoom call. I mean, they're spread from Logan down to St. George and from Eastern to Western Utah. And so a lot of times I don't know what my colleagues are working on, and they don't know what I'm working on. It's not because it's like this big secret. It's just like when we're together, we're talking about our families and sports, and then when you show up in January, then you start unrolling your bill. So I don't really know. The best way to tell is to look at the agendas for our interim meetings this Wednesday, because there's going to be, and I think there's 8 interim committees. There will probably be 5 or 6 bills on every agenda. And if those bills get a favorable recommendation, they will likely be heard the first or second week of the session in January. So that's, if you want to know 48 bills, that those agendas, some of them are published already, but they have to be published by tomorrow, 24-hour rule. But I will say there's probably going to be 30 or 40 or 50 election-related reform bills, and they'll all come from the House of Representatives because of Phil Lyman's campaign and because of Cody Jenkins's campaign and because of the 2020 election when Trump said it was stolen. It wasn't stolen. He lost. And I'm sure there will be some on immigration, but a question I've been asking for 15 years, you might like this, Marina, how many buses does it take to deport 12 million people? Has anybody done that math? Because it's a hell of a lot of buses. So I'm not a very good Republican when it comes to immigration, because my attitude is if they're here in our communities, we should be treating them with love and respect. And the border policy, that should be set by the federal government, but that's not really my concern in the state legislature. So I'm a bad Republican when it comes to immigration issues. I'm saying that tongue in cheek. But I do think that out of necessity, the focus is going to be on illegal immigrants or undocumented workers, whatever you want to call them. I'm not trying to be offensive, who are in jail or who are committed or are being tried for violent crimes. I think that's the low fruit that's easy to pick. People that are here and they're not legally here, and if they're committing crimes, I think those people are the most likely to be deported. How much further it goes than that, I don't know.
And that's the thing that gets my international adoption bill stuck every year in the national legislature. Okay. So thank you for all of this information, by the way. I know this was a lot for those who have not had lots of exposure to our legislative process. Who is the best person from our organizations to advocate for something? Is it the CEO? Is it, can I, if I'm a mid-level employee, what can I do? Who's kind of best positioned?
I think anyone who's articulate And you don't want someone that's going to be trembling because they're so nervous and their whole neck is turning red. That's not probably your best spokesman. Or someone that has a real personal experience where, so even if they are trembling and crying, if it's something that happened to them or their child, I think that can be also very effective.
Okay, great. Questions from the audience. Curtis, do you still have the microphone? Curtis is going to be our mic guy. Is that okay?
Phil Donahue over there.
Okay, Kimberly has a question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of the information you've given. When you have an idea or something that you'd like to reach out to your legislator with, what is the best time of year to do so? I understand things must get busy closer to this legislative session, so what would be your suggestions?
Not January through March.
I know, I would say not now
Yeah,
even.
and even November's kind of late, but not critical too late. And also not right after the session, because it's like, and I'm sorry this is not a fair example and I'm sexist for saying it, but it's like asking a woman right after they gave birth if they're having more children. So like right after the session, because the last week is hell, if you call me up the next day and want to talk about a bill, I'm like, give me 2 months. So I would say really May through September-ish, October-ish is the prime time. Right now it's getting late, but it's still not too late. But what people do is they read in the newspaper in January that the session started and they're like, I've got this brilliant idea. It's like, great, because there's already been 1,300 bills requested and our staff only has capacity to draft 800 of them. And we only have capacity to pass about 550 of them. So yeah, January is way too late.
Great. Martine, and then I've forgotten your name. Sorry. Mati? Mati. Okay.
My question, going back to the immigration, since if we're generally speaking, you're saying, hey, they're going to focus on illegal immigrants who commit crimes, ones that are basically ruin their opportunity.
That's my guess.
The guess. What would you say from that with the 30 bills we think there's that are coming up? How much, what is that number? What is that percentage really? Like how many, can you give me a rough estimate of how many immigrants we currently have in the system due to crimes or violent crimes? Because I feel like 30, that's a lot of manpower if that number is
Yeah, so the 30 bills won't all pass. Someone will probably be the same ideas. I think most of the bills will be trying to require our sheriffs or our local law enforcement to like cooperate with the federal government. I'm guessing that that's what it will be. Or to report, like if there's people in prison that we know that are undocumented, to maybe report that to ICE. I'm just guessing, I don't know. But I will tell you the problem I have with some of the far right Republicans is they treat everyone from a different country as if they're illegal. So if they're refugees who have come here legally, if they're people who are on like one of those coveted visas, EB2s or whatever they're called, they treat them all as if they're the same. And I think that's offensive to me. Refugees are not illegal aliens. I mean, and Utah has one of the 11 refugee centers in the country, and we've had two. We now have two, and we've had at least one since the 70s. And I think we have a proud heritage in Utah because the Mormon pioneers were cast out and refugees, and so I think our culture wants to embrace these people. But there are some people on the far right that I think are very hateful and just mean-spirited, and it offends me that they're in the same party as me. It doesn't offend me enough to change parties, but it is offensive to me at a certain level.
Okay. I'm Monsi with Planned Parenthood Association of Utah. And I'm fairly new to the state and will be going up to the Hill very soon for the first time. So relationship building with legislators is extremely important to me, especially with the issues that we deal with. I'm not going to talk about that today. My question is, how do you find a champion for your business among legislators? Like, if you have any advice, how would I go about that?
Well, here's a great, because you have several opportunities. So you can start with there's a Senate. So for every piece of real estate in Utah, there's a senator and a representative that's in their district. So you can start with the elected officials of the property where your business is located. But then you can look at, because most of you don't live right next door to your business place. So then you can look at maybe key employees and who their representatives are, because we care the most about the people who can vote for or against us. And so, but I've often been invited to tour a business, that's located in Bountiful, which is my district. And I don't say, hey, who here lives in Bountiful? So I don't do that. I try to show up for a ribbon cutting if I'm invited or whatever. So you have more than one shot, because you have a House and a Senate member for each, for the business location, and then a House and Senate member for each key employee. And so I would say contact all of them.
The other thing I always do, I don't know if this translates business-wise, but when it comes to relationship building, I'm just always looking for ways that I can connect with lawmakers. So, when there's a new batch of legislators coming in, I will do some snooping around on the internet and find out,
That means you, Verona, we've snooped on you already.
But, things like maybe where did they go to school, or where do they work? Where do their kids go to school? All that information is usually available on people's campaign websites. They talk about their families, their interests, their things like that. And, when it comes to making relationships with legislators, that's sometimes where you have to start, just connecting as human beings. Hey, I saw that you graduated from BYU. So did I. What year? And then you create sort of.
Liar, you
I
didn't
know,
go to
I did not
BYU.
go to BYU. Just use it for, the example of you. But it can be a starting place.
Out of state.
That's true. That's true. Well, when I first moved here, I was actually applying for jobs as a lawyer, and I will never forget, every interview I went to, they asked me if I went to the U or the Y. And it was like, there are other law schools. It's not just the U and the Y. Anyway.
Is there value in there's leadership in both the House and the Senate, right? There's sort of ranking leadership. Is there value in trying to find a legislator that is higher ranking or not?
Yes, but those people are going to be even harder to get to, and they're going to have a lot more requests. And so I think that there are well-respected members in both bodies who aren't in leadership that can be just as effective and sometimes more effective than those that are in leadership, especially at passing bills.
The other thing I would say is you can also look online. I think Senator Weiler mentioned how amazing our legislative webpage is, but you can look back historically too, and you start to see patterns of legislators that like certain issues. For example, Representative Angela Romero runs a ton of legislation in the area of domestic violence. So if you knew that your issue sort of resonated with that particular legislator, that might be a good person to approach. A number of years ago, I reached out to Senator Weiler and had him sponsor a bill that dealt with the Fourth Amendment issue, because I had noticed that he was a lawyer and he was on Senate Judiciary and seemed to care about issues of search and seizure and the Fourth Amendment. And sure enough, he agreed.
Also, I think to look at legislators to know kind of where their hot buttons are, to Marina's point, we had a group come forward and they were saying, hey, we want to move forward this bill that you can't have your dogs in the back of a car. And, we all love dogs. And if you're driving down the freeway, you don't like to see a dog in the back of the truck, so it's one of those, oh, yes, that's such a great idea. But they put that bill in front of a bunch of ranchers. You can imagine how that went. And they were devastated because they just know that they just were working for the animals. And so you kind of have to know where their hot buttons are, where their passions are. If they're ranchers, they probably don't care if a dog is in the back of the truck,
Okay, last question, Stacey?
Can you speak to the influence of lobbyists, and would it be better as a citizen or a representative of a business, would it be better for them to connect to a lobbyist on behalf of an issue versus trying to get straight to their representative?
It pains me to admit that sometimes, not always, sometimes people contact me and I'm like, you know what? I'm on your side. I'm with you. But if you really want to get this done, you probably need to hire lobbyists. The problem with lobbyists is they're really expensive. Now, Marina's not a hired gun. She's not out, but with a shingle, anybody can hire her. She's working for her causes that she believes in. And Ginger has primarily worked with Salt Lake Chamber, and that may be changing in the future. But I would say 85 to 90% of the time, I think you can just contact your legislator and work with them. There are some issues where you're going to kind of be trying to move the earth, and I think, a good lobbyist is helpful. Now, I just want to say, lobbyists, They build relationships and they are more accessible to legislators. It's not, at least my perception, and you might say, sure, because you're in there. It's not that we're all bribed by lobbyists. It's not what's going on. It's that we, like Marina, she's built up a relationship of trust with me. And if I ask Marina, if she's talking about an issue and I say, well, what's the other side of this? She's going to tell me the other side of it. And I'm going to vote on probably 100 different issues, next session in 6 weeks. I can't be an expert at all of them. So a lot of times the lobbyists are bringing us expertise. And that is, we need information, we need data, we need talking points. And so I just want you to know, do lobbyists raise money for us? Do they donate to us? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If you had 30 lobbyists in here and said which ones have donated to your campaign, I probably couldn't tell you without looking at my disclosures. But the reality is it's all about the relationships. And is it someone that you trust? Is it someone that you are going to rearrange your schedule for? So that's where the lobbyists are most helpful.
Great. Okay, we're going to wrap up the panel. One last question. What is one action that each of us can do to build better bridges between policymakers and business?
Don't go on Twitter.
Don't read Todd's Twitter. I'm just kidding. Although I'm quite entertained by your Twitter.
You're the one.
I've done screenshots
You're so
and
much
sent it to
nicer
him.
in person.
Yeah, that's true. I would say look at both sides. There's always two sides to an issue, and really educate yourself on both sides, because most people go in with a one-sided vision, and I just don't think that's helpful at all.
Sometimes there's 4 or 5 sides to an issue,
That's
but
true. That's true.
I'd say meet your legislator in person, and preferably not during the session. Try to do it beforehand. One suggestion I've been giving for years, and it's going to sound self-interested, and you can take it what is you, but it works. The first time I did this to a group, somebody did it to me. I was mowing my lawn in the backyard, but I still remember them. Go and write. You guys are young enough. Do you still know what checks are? Write out a check to. I'm not joking. We can't take money during sessions. Write out a check for $10 and go and knock on your legislator's door and say, "Hey, I'm Nancy. I live, 2 streets over. You're my legislator. I know it's expensive to run your campaigns. I wanted to give you this donation, and I'm going to tell you why I'm doing this." And say, I wish I could donate more, but this particular law is actually preventing my business from being more profitable. Now, if you do that to me, and I've had people that listen to me do this to me, I have to go and type your name and your address into my financial disclosures. And the next time you contact me, not only do I know that you're a constituent, but you donated. So I'm saying $10. It doesn't have to be $1,000. It doesn't have to be $100. And I also know that you know where I live, which is a little bit scary, but part of being elected office. But that's a great way, and no one's going to be mad at you for knocking on their door when you're handing them money, even if it's $5 or $10. And so that's a suggestion I've been giving out for a while. It could be more, it could be less. It doesn't really matter. The issue is the reason you want to do the check is because it has your name and address, and they need to disclose that as part of their disclosures of their contributions.
Only $10.
Or
All it
15.
takes.
You could do more.
And you have to order checks.
Yeah. You can't Venmo us because we can't tie our Venmo to our campaign accounts. Anyway.
Details. Well, I was going to say reach out to your legislators. I think that's so important. But I'll take it one step further and just say be involved in the Utah legislative process. Follow along, see what's happening. I think so often a lot of Americans tune into politics every 4 years for the big splashy presidential election. But the reality is what happens at the Utah legislature has so much more impact on all of our everyday lives. These are policies that really affect the way that we live in this state in Utah. And so try and get engaged and be engaged outside of the big 4-year presidential elections. Follow along, meet your legislators, and be a part of the process.
Thank you. My final advice would be if you don't have a bill that you actually care about and want to work on, find a bill that is interesting to you and follow it. I think you'll learn a lot by just following what happens to a bill. And we've got amazing resources, like, the Salt Lake Chamber is an amazing resource. They're so, I think, really transparent and really try to share information with those. So I think that'll the ability to experience the political process in sort of our state's flavor is, I think, the most interesting learning experience that you can have. And I actually think it gives you some hope if you're feeling a little bit hopeless because of certain things. Get involved and actually experience it and see that there are things. This is how it's done, and this is how you can participate.
Can I say one last thing? If you were to randomly select 100 Utahns, just randomly select them, let's say adults, just randomly select them, and then you got to know them. Some of them would be smart, and some of them wouldn't. Some of them would be nice, and some of them wouldn't. Some would be hardworking, some would be lazy, all the way down the spectrum. That, in a nutshell, is the Utah legislature.
Manage your expectations. Thank you to Senator Weiler, Ginger, Marina for being here and really sharing this wealth of knowledge. And I know we just barely scratched the surface of what you know and understand. I want to thank you all for taking your time out of the day to be here. I know there's a lot of personal issues that you care about. So like I said, if there's a topic or an issue that you care about, follow it along the legislature and see how you can participate. Feel free to stay, feel free to grab a drink. You can go out to the atrium. They have service there as well. If you want a tour, this is a really cool space. So if you've never been here and you're already here and you have 30 more minutes, feel free. It's a really cool space. Make sure to go see the karaoke room. All right, so thank you. And can we give a round of applause to our really great legislative experts?